All right, on to passage 3 of the third practice test for the ACT English section. Let's get to it. This is called the Suzuki method, and this is about this guy, Dr. Shinichi Suzuki, who came up with this way of teaching music to young children. So let's just get to the first question, number 31. In the early 1930s, Dr. Shinichi Suzuki was teaching violin at the Imperial Conservatory in Japan. A father brought in his 4-year-old son for lessons. Okay, well, to understand why this is wrong, you have to read a little bit further, and this is where you need to be focused on. You have this subject and this verb, followed by a new subject and a new verb. Now you have this comma, but you don't have the corresponding conjunction, and when you have two independent clauses, in a case like this, you need to have some kind of separation. A comma and an would do it. But in this case, you don't have that. So basically, you just have what's called a comma splice, meaning just a comma separating two independent clauses. So this whole thing is a run-on sentence. It just goes on and on. So this is wrong. Well, what about B? Dr. Shinichi Suzuki taught. That's the same problem. You still have a new subject verb followed by a new subject new verb without any kind of conjunction there. So that is problematic. So B is also wrong. What about that Dr. Shinichi Suzuki was teaching? In the early 1930s, that Dr. Shinichi Suzuki was teaching violin at the Imperial Conservatory in Japan. Well, what is that referring to? That needs to relate whatever comes after with something, and it's not doing that at all. So this wouldn't work either. What about D? While Dr. Shinichi Suzuki was teaching, well, this makes sense. There's a logical it's a logical proper placement in the sense that if you write in the 1930s, while Dr. Shinichi Suzuki was teaching violin at the Imperial Conservatory in Japan, meaning at the time he was doing this, while he was doing this, a father came in with her father brought in his 4-year-old son, So that makes perfect sense. You don't have two separate subjects and two verbs not connected properly. You have this subject would be, the whole thing would be father, and the verb would be brought, and then that phrase, while Dr. Shinichi Suzuki was teaching, that whole part would be a modifying dependent clause. So this would make sense. You wouldn't have two separate independent clauses not properly separated. So everything would work there. What about this next part? Question 32. At this point in the essay, the writer wants to show that Dr. Suzuki did not feel prepared to teach music at the preschool level. Given that all of the choices are true, which one best conveys that message? So which one conveys the message that he's like, well, I don't really feel comfortable teaching at this young age, preschool kids, you know. I'm used to teaching older students. So, although, what did it say? Although Suzuki had never taught anyone so young, he reluctantly agreed to accept the tiny violin student. Well, that works. I mean, because he says, although he had never taught anyone so young, it's like, although I never taught anyone so young, okay, I'll take this student on. That certainly shows that he felt uncomfortable, probably, or not prepared teaching very, very young students, but he did it anyway. So F, there's no problem. What about G? Generally, conservatory students were between 17 and 25 years of age, and he. Well, does that make sense? Why would it say he did this, he taught very old students, and he would agree to accept the tiny violin student? There's an illogical continuation there. If he's used to teaching older students, he should probably be hesitant to teach a very, very young student. But there is no contrast here described, and so G would be wrong. What about H? Given the fact that his music students were much older, he deliberately agreed to accept the tiny violin student. Well, that certainly doesn't make sense. It has the same problem G does, Why would it be, given the fact that his music students were much older? If all his music students were a lot older, why would he deliberately, meaning consciously, choose to pick a very young student? Wouldn't he probably want to deliberately choose an older student like he's used to? So H doesn't make sense. What about J? After conversing with the boy's parents? Well, after conversing with boy's parents, he agreed to accept. Well, that doesn't really show that he's not used to or not prepared properly to teach very young students. It just says, well, I talked to the boy's parents and I was like, okay, let's do it. It really doesn't indicate the lack of preparation, his lack of comfort with it. So F would be the only correct answer choice that makes sense. All right, on to question 33. Let's read a little bit before. As he pondered what training might work for this preschooler, Suzuki began to think about how young children learn to use language in very sophisticated ways. He suspected that this miraculous seeming process may or may not offer valuable insights into how all learning occurs. Okay, is there any problem with this? No, he's saying he began to think about how children learn language, and he wondered, hey, maybe the way they learn language has implications and relevancies with how all learning occurs, maybe including music learning. So there is no wrong thing about that. The logic of that is everything kind of flows in the same direction. There are no contrasts that are needed. There are no contrasts that would make sense there, okay? He thought about how language learning occurs, and then he thought, well, this could work for other things. So the problem with B is that you have this contrast word nevertheless. C, you have that again with however, and D, you have another one instead. So A would be the only correct answer, and again, whenever you have answer choices where 2 or 3 of them are clearly almost exactly the same, they're probably, all wrong. So in this case, you certainly have B, C, D. They're pretty much exactly the same. The only word is the only difference is the choice of the contrast word. And so A is the only correct answer. All right, 34. He suspected that this miraculous seeming process may or may not offer valuable insights into how all. Okay. I think when people are learning or haven't read a lot or want to be very precise, they say they may or may not, will or will not, whether or not. You actually don't need to say or not. You can just say might or whether. You just say the first thing and you don't need to say the rest. You don't need to say the or not. And this is certainly the case. You don't need to say or may not offer. You could just say that this miraculous seeming process may offer. Okay, that would eliminate the wordiness and make it a lot more succinct and concise and straight to the point. So no change wouldn't work, but might offer could work. That's fine. What about could suggest important? Well, the problem with this is could suggest could be fine, but you have important and then you have valuable right after. So that creates a repetition, a redundancy. So H couldn't be right. And then you have might indeed provide one with. That is certainly just way too wordy. Why do you have to say that when you can just say might offer? The other thing is you have this word one. You know how they say like, one should do this if one wants to do this. That sort of construction is absent everywhere else in this passage. And so it's sort of this weird, take it out of context wording that's inappropriate to the rest of the essay. You could say that's a minor detail. The major problem with J, again, is just the wordiness. You can just say might offer. It's just much more straight to the point. 35. All right. Immersion was already understood to be a key to a child's language development by Suzuki. Okay. The problem with this question is that, first of all, though this is not really the big issue, is that it's in the passive voice. Now, being in the passive voice where it's where you have, let's say, was already understood to be a key. That's just an issue of if you could say it in the active voice where you have a clear subject first and then the active form of the verb. Like instead of was understood, you could just say something understands. That's usually better. But really what the major problem here is that you have this preposition that follows what? Development. Well, what is by Suzuki supposed to be doing? It's supposed to be the one that understands, right? Not the development is by Suzuki. The development is not by Suzuki. It should be this. But because this by Suzuki is placed after development, it creates that nonsensical confusion. What about B? As Suzuki already understood that immersion is a key to a child's development. Okay. This is what you would call a sentence fragment, meaning you don't actually have a subject or a verb. And it's kind of weird to think because you have a lot of words here, but you basically just have this modifying clause. That's a dependent clause, so the subject and verb aren't going to be located there. And then you have this relative pronoun that. So what follows is basically just a giant adjective, big modifying phrase. Well, modifying what? No subject, no verb. What about C? Suzuki already understood that immersion is a key to a child's language development. Well, that's great. It's not in the passive voice. Suzuki understood, and you don't really have any issues of misplaced prepositions, just like the by Suzuki in the answer choice A. And then D, a key to a child's language development. This is an issue of a misplaced modifier. What comes after a key? Or a key, that whole modifying phrase. Suzuki. Is Suzuki the key to a child's language development? Well, not really. Maybe he might say, "Oh, I'm so awesome. I'm the key to all development." But aside from him, being self-deluded and crazy, he wouldn't be the key. That's not exactly what's going on. What should be the key is immersion. So immersion would have to come right after that comma, not Suzuki. So D is wrong because it's a misplaced modifier issue. All right, 36. In 36, it says, babies' first attempts at speech generate excited responses from adults. All right. Is there anything wrong with this being plural? No, because they're talking about babies in general, right? The problem is, what's the subject here? Is it babies or is it attempts? They're attempts at speech, right? Their attempts generate excited responses. It's not like the babies generate the excited responses. Maybe when you first see them, but it's when they're trying to talk, that's when the adults get excited. It's their attempts. Babies should be possessive. It should be whose attempts? The baby's attempts. So you would need an apostrophe after babies for this sentence to make sense, for it to work. So which answer choice does that? Well, J obviously does that. Babies, that's not even a correct, that's just completely incorrect. The plural form is B-A-B-I-E-S, not B-A-B-Y-S. That actually sounds like Babis. And then babies, this is wrong because they're talking about babies in general, so it has to be plural, so you have to use the plural form, babies, B-A-B-I-E-S. Okay? 37. Teachers provide in-depth language understanding and children are rewarded for improving his or her communication skills. Okay, this is an issue where you have to look at the antecedent for this pronoun or these pronouns, his or her. Well, what is it talking about? Whose communication skills? It's children, right? That's plural. And you have another reminder that this pronoun should be plural with the plural are, right? So children are rewarded for improving. Is it his or her or their? It should be their. And it should be this form, T-H-E-I-R, THERE means over there in terms of location. Ones wouldn't work because that's also singular, and again, no change doesn't work either. All right, on to question 38. It says, given that all of the choices are true, which one would provide the most effective link between sentences 4 and 6? All right, so sentence 4 is about how children are rewarded for improving their communication skills. And then sentence 6 says this program has since grown into an internationally acclaimed philosophy of music education. Keywords being his program and music education. Sentence 5, based on these realizations, Suzuki developed an awareness of how children learn language. All right, so the problem here is obviously not grammatical in any way. The problem is that it doesn't really have much to do with his own program that he developed or about music. So it's just, it has a bit of irrelevancy. And again, just developing an awareness is not the same as actually developing a program, right? What about G? Developed a unique approach to violin studies. It certainly has to do with music and his unique approach, something he developed. So G works. What about H? Transferred his knowledge into something positive. Well, that's about as vague as you can get. It certainly has nothing to do with music, and it doesn't actually indicate specifically that he developed it into some kind of program or form of study that he could, help others teach or teach others. And J, decided to see where this information might acquire more additional applications. That is certainly way too general, doesn't have much to do with music, and doesn't have to do with a program that he developed himself, okay? The other problem is that you have this you could say a grammar issue of redundancy of more and additional. You can just say more or you can just say additional. You don't have to say both. If you say both, it's just redundant, it's repetitive. So the only H choice that works is G. Moving on, 39. The writer is considering adding the following true statement to this paragraph. Babies begin to coordinate hand and eye movements early in life. Should the sentence be added to this paragraph? And if so, where should it be placed? All right, before we kind of go into this, what you need to keep in mind is that this sentence is talking about hand and eye movements. What is this passage about? Is it about hand-eye movements? No, it's about language development. So immediately, you should be somewhat skeptical because this does seem to be an irrelevant sentence. So let's go to it. Should you place it after sentence 1? So it'd be before sentence 2. They have, babies develop what? Begin to coordinate hand and eye movements early in life. And then you have newborns are immersed in language. That doesn't really make sense to have one right after the other. They're not really related. Then you have newborns are immersed in language. Then they develop hand-eye coordination. Babies' first attempts at speech. No, you have a sentence about language, and then a random sentence about hand-eye coordination, and then another attempt at language. So that also doesn't work. What about after sentence 3? About how adults get excited and encourage them. And then it says teachers provide in-depth language understanding. Does that make sense? Or you have, again, language, hand-eye coordination, language? No, it doesn't. So just because it has to do with babies doesn't mean it should go into that sentence. Babies do millions of different things. So logically, what probably should be done is that sentence shouldn't be put in at all. D, the sentence should not be added because it sort of detracts from the meaning of that paragraph. All right, number 40. In the Suzuki method, students are immersed in music. Period. Each day, students and their families listen to. What's wrong here? Nothing's wrong here. You have subject, verb, right? Each day, subject, verb. Nothing wrong. You have two separate independent clauses, grammatically separated by new sentences. So F seems to be fine. What about G? Well, in G, you have this comma and, right? That's indicating, okay, you have a new sentence here. But if you have a new sentence, why does it start with that? That is a relative pronoun, meaning it basically describes something else. Meaning whatever comes after that is supposed to relate to something else. Well, you don't really get that, okay? And if you start off that sentence with that each, you actually don't have an independent clause anymore. You have that each day students and their families listen to recorded music that at a future date the students later learn on an instrument. That's a sentence fragment, okay? That whole thing would be part of that relative clause, and so you'd have no subject, no verb. You'd basically just have a giant relative clause modifying phrase. Okay, so this is wrong for those two reasons. H is wrong for those two, for that issue, as in that doesn't really modify music. This part, whatever, doesn't directly modify music. And that first independent clause, students are immersed in music, should be its own independent clause, and then each day students and the family should be its own separate independent clause. And if you have this start with that, it basically makes that second part a dependent clause, and it just sort of confuses the meaning of the sentence, okay? Because that is certainly very inappropriate to put there. And then J, if you have J, you have are immersed in music, comma, each day, you have a run-on sentence, because you have each day students, you have new subject, new verb. Well, if you're gonna have a comma, you need some kind of conjunction like the word and you certainly don't have that, creating a comma splice, basically a comma connecting two independent clauses to a run-on sentence, and so that would be wrong as well. So you have to use F, meaning just take it as is, no change. All right, 41. Recorded music that at a future date the students later. Okay, this is an issue of redundancy. Look here, it says later. Well, what does later mean? At a future date, right? So do you even need that? It doesn't really seem like it. So A certainly would be wrong. What about subsequently? Subsequently means later, right? Sometime later, afterwards. What about before long? That also means later, meaning not too long later. What about omit the underlined portion? Yeah, that seems that like it would make the most sensical thing to do, eliminating the redundancy, just outright, just getting rid of it, just saying goodbye. Okay? 42. Lessons provide expert assistance, group sessions and concerts, reward students with opportunities to share music. Well, anything wrong here? No, what sticks out is that everything is in the present tense, okay? It's saying on an ongoing basis, these lessons provide expert assistance. Group sessions and concerts reward students on an ongoing, continuing basis. So there is nothing wrong with reward here. It's perfectly fine. Rewarded, that's past tense. That doesn't fit in with the rest of the sentence. Had rewarded, past perfect, doesn't mesh well with the rest of the sentence. And then in rewarding, that's not even a verb. That's a prepositional phrase. So that wouldn't make sense, because you need to have a verb here, because you have this noun, verb, predicate, nominative, meaning whatever comes after that stuff, whatever comes after the verb, okay? So the only answer choice that makes sense is F, no change. All right, 43. Given that all of the choices are true, which one would provide the most effective introductory phrase? 43. Even so, for a long time, Suzuki encouraged students and teachers alike to strive toward lifelong learning. Okay, first of all, for a long time, you could say a problem with that is it could be more specific. The other problem is even so. which shows some kind of which would indicate there's some kind of contrast with what came before. But Suzuki was talking about how his program, how he wants to spread his programs out, right, about how kids learn, and he does seem to like it, right? He does seem to have a focus on it. So does it make sense if you start off this next paragraph with even so, as in spite of all the programs he made and all the work he did towards developing a study for helping kids learn music, that is it sort of a contrast that he encouraged students and teachers to strive towards lifelong learning? No, it's not a contrast at all. It's something occurring in the same vein, okay? So even so is the big problem there for choice A. What about recurrently with time? Well, if something is recurrently, it's occurring over and over again. So with time doesn't really make sense to add to it. It just doesn't sort of really make sense. The other issue is you say recurrently, that's just saying over and over, but it doesn't really fit to say he over and over encourages them. Probably what the sentence is trying to say is that for a long period of time, Suzuki, or for most of his life, Suzuki has encouraged lifelong learning, right? But what about for many decades? Well, that's more specific. It's talking about how, over a large course of his life, that makes sense, and you certainly don't have that even so, very strange contrast. And what about D? For scores of years then, okay, well, a score is a period, no one says that anymore. Score is a term they used like maybe 100 years ago. A score is about a period of 20 for scores of years then. This is sort of a antiquated way of describing something. The other issue is the word then. Then implies that there is some kind of logical relationship with what came before, okay? But that's not really the case. Where this last part was about lessons provide expert assistance, group sessions, and constant reward students with opportunities to share music. The prior paragraph is just about sort of the program itself and how they teach music, right? What Suzuki's method advocates for teaching music. Is that logically something that comes right before how, as a result, Suzuki encourages students to learn? No, there is not a causal connection where one sort of leads to another. They're just related. One is just talking about Suzuki's program. And so this would be the wrong issue. And so the only answer choice that makes any kind of sense is C, for many decades. All right, 44, almost done with the passage. Okay, let's see what it says. Worldwide, he promoted the idea that every child possesses the potential to develop musical talent and for the joys of achievement. Well, you have a list of two. The potential to do this and da-da-da. Well, it says the potential to do this. What about this? Does for the joys of achievement match or have a parallel structure to do something? Do you have infinitive with infinitive? No, you don't. And because this is not underlined, you know this is the correct form that you have to match this up. So what would work? Well, obviously, if you see J, it says to experience the joys of music. That has an infinitive form, to experience, parallel structure, and G and H both do not have that parallel structure at all. So J is the only answer choice that works. All right, last question for this passage. Question 45. All that is teaching inspired are enriched, who hear the beautiful music. This is certainly just a lot wrong with this sentence. First thing that should be sticking out is that if you have all are enriched who, this relative pronoun needs to modify what comes right before, but who should be modifying people, not being enriched, okay? The other thing that should stick out is that you have all, which probably refers to people, but it's followed by the word that, okay? All is people, so it should be followed by a relative pronoun that reflects that. Who? You don't describe people with the words that as relative pronouns. You use people who. So the people who are going to the mall, you don't say people that are going to the mall. And if you think, you do have to think this kind of sentence or this kind of question through logically to sort of figure out what goes where. It seems like all who hear the beautiful music is one clause that should come after all, right? So there is this problem. So A is incorrect. B has that same problem where you have all that, and again you need that all who hear the beautiful music should probably be coming right after all. What about C? All who hear the beautiful music that is teaching inspired are enriched. This is perfectly fine. You have all who hear the beautiful music, so people are referred to properly, and then you have this relative pronoun clause that his teaching inspired, modifying the music that is beautiful music inspired, and then all those people are enriched. The verb are enriched, okay? So that makes perfect sense. And what about D? All are enriched by hearing the beautiful music of which his teaching inspired. Well, this just gets rid of the who, so you could say all are enriched by hearing the beautiful music. That is, that could work. The only problem is you have this wrong connector phrase of which his teaching inspired. That's supposed to say his music inspired, I guess, his by hearing the beautiful music of which his teaching was. That's supposed to say his teaching inspired this music, but when you say of which, that almost implies that his teaching inspired is a part of beautiful music or is somehow a component of beautiful music. It would be the wrong choice of words to use. The only choice that would work that would be closest to this would be if you wrote comma which his teaching inspired, and that would make this sentence correct. But other than that, C is the only one that seems to make sense at all. It's the most clearly worded and grammatically correct. So that's it. That's the answer for 45C. And whenever you're ready, let's move on to passage 4.